perhaps not surprisingly, as you've alluded to, assessment providers have been amongst the first to pick up on the use of the framework. Was that anticipated, do you think, when you published the framework 10 years ago?
I'm not sure whether it was anticipated. It could have been anticipated because that was really the basic driving force. So I think it's not surprising that that was the first exploitation that people could see for the framework.
Right.
And it arose from their own practical needs and considerations rather than from any conscious intention on the part of the people launching the framework.
And as you've already alluded to, the framework, and particularly the global scale, in its 6th level version, has spilled out from Europe, as you might say, from Chile to China. And it's being widely referred to now. Some people might argue that sort of indicates that the CFR has become too big for its boots and gone beyond what is good for the users. For example, it's a European concept being used in a non-European environment. What's your comment on that?
If it arouses interest in other parts of the world, and in very different parts of the world, this is because of the perceived needs of the people there and their belief that there's something which they can use. It isn't the result of any imperialist ambitions.
Particularly due to the wider use now of the framework, some voices are becoming particularly critical, and they have perhaps highlighted, in their view, some aspects which they think are outdated perhaps, or not fully up to date in the ways that people think about teaching and learning. And others are particularly worried that the drivers are not needs felt by the profession, but drivers to do with political expediencies, governments and agencies seeing the framework, particularly its scale, its global scale, as a way of developing policy. Was that anticipated, or is that within what you think is appropriate for the use of the framework?
I think it arises from need, again. And if this a feeling of need for such an apparatus is there, the need for calibration is there, then in one way or another, that need should be met. And so I know that the whole question of equivalence of qualifications has been fraught for many, many years in many subjects, not simply in languages. Yeah. And in fact, we were anxious not to provide the kind of dispute and infighting that some of these attempts have previously encountered, which have led to their failure.
Sure. And perhaps the whole endeavour, equivalency is difficult.
Yes,
I mean, that's what I find interesting.
One of the reasons for having a 6-level system and not, say, a 20-level system or a decimal system where you can have a proficiency of 5.425 or something like that, was that I don't think that the phenomena themselves allow for the reduction of proficiency to a linear scale which can be calibrated in that degree of detail. And for that reason, one wants a relatively robust system with sufficient differentiation to make the statements meaningful but not going beyond what can be reasonably said for such a global concept, for a large variety of learners under very different conditions. If it is overinterpreted, and if people try to use it for purposes for which it's not suited, then I think that's their responsibility.
But the global scale is clearly very attractive as a way of scaling proficiency. But do you think, because it's become so popular, it's brought with it the dangers of oversimplification you're referring to?
Well,
People seeking easy answers to complex
I don't
questions.
think it's because the system is oversimplified, but if it is then people then attempt to use it as a precision instrument, then for a variety of different reasons, the general scheme can't be used in that way. For one thing, for example, if one is talking about grammatical progression, I don't think one can go beyond what we did in the threshold level, which is to set out the various parameters in which, for different languages, that might be expressed. When it comes to what it is feasible to the ways in which it is feasible to organize grammatical progression is a matter for each language separately, and not for a general scheme.
Are you perhaps highlighting here one of the difficulties that people struggle with, perhaps, which is an underlying dilemma, one between the need for commonality, which makes it attractive and generalizable, and the need for specificity when it comes to applying the scheme and the framework to a particular context, and the tension between the general and the specific, perhaps, which exists, is not fully understood by some users.
I think when it comes to understanding, the basis of understanding is a close acquaintance with the facts. And I think that the first thing people need to do before they set about the criticism of the European framework and its use is first to read it, and read it with some care. And secondly, to see what the Council of Europe has said about its implementation. And particularly, I would like to see critics look carefully at the recommendation of the Committee of Ministers, which is what's CM Rec 20087. That is Resolution 7 of the Committee of Ministers in 2008. That
was an important document, I remember now, because it came out as a result of the Intergovernmental Forum, I think it was 2007, which actually reviewed a survey that has been conducted by the Council of Europe to look at the uses of and impacts of the CFR in the period between 2001 and 2006-07. So it was actually basing its further recommendations on a heightened awareness of what actually had begun to happen. And I know that it had already been noted that the CFR had become a powerful tool, both in policy making at national levels, and also had begun to be adopted by the European Union through the work of the Commission for projects such as the European Indicator of Language Competencies, now known as the Surveylang project.
Well, it is not the first case in which ideas pioneered by the Council of Europe and accepted by member governments because it is non-mandatory, always non-mandatory and permissive, and which then leads to greater anxieties when it is taken up by the European Union, which has directive powers and which has much greater financial resources, where it can use, for example, as a condition for access to those resources.